Well, good evening, everyone. This is the Blue Seahorse Show, and I'm Mike Siver with my guest, Carrie Sluter. And we're here tonight to talk about being forced to agree. It's a chapter out of one of my books, and it's something that we both felt was appropriate for tonight. I'll start reading a little bit out of the book, and then, Carrie, you jump in anytime you want to. I know you got a lot to say about this one.
I'll let you lead the show.
All right, thank you. Forced to agree. If you would just listen to me, you would understand what I'm talking about. Then you would agree with me. How many of us are beat up emotionally by others who will not accept the fact that we really do understand what they're saying? We just don't agree with them.
Right.
And how many times do we get that with our partners, with our children, with our bosses, with our employees, or fellow coworkers? And some people think that they're so right that they're either not explaining it to you correctly, because if they did, you'd agree with them, or you're not listening to them. And I sometimes get into some very interesting discussions with people when I try to explain to them, and I have actually said this a couple of times. Listen, I hear you, I understand you, I can repeat back what you're saying, I just don't agree with you.
Right.
And they don't understand why. I said, because it's my choice. I have a different information than you have. I have a different view of what you have. And with what your view and your information, you feel comfortable that you're correct in what you're saying. But with my information and my view, I disagree with you.
Mm-hmm.
And we can leave it at that and say we agree to disagree.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're going to keep hounding me because I don't agree with you,
Right.
now we have a problem. Now, I'm listening to you, but you're not listening to me when I tell you I don't agree with you.
Right.
And the one thing you don't ever do or haven't ever done while you've been talking to me is ask me, why don't I agree with you?
Mm-hmm.
And once you can get the other person, as we talked about before the show, who's trying to get you to agree on, to be on their side and to agree with them, once they start to ask questions of you, why don't you agree? That means they've got to listen now.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of times people, as we talked about on other shows too, when you start to tell them something, at least halfway through the conversation, you can see they're formulating a reply already.
Mm-hmm.
They're already thinking of their answer. And as soon as they start to think of their answer, they've stopped listening.
Right.
And I know you've experienced that in the past with what
I've written about it and talked about it on my show as well.
And how do we change that in people today? How do we address that issue?
Well, a big part of it is maybe to get people to really start stopping and thinking about, am I arguing or is this a debate? The difference between an argument and a debate. What is the difference in that? If you're insistent, listen, I've heard what you said. I know that, I understand what you're saying, but I still don't agree with you. And here's why. That is a debate. And a debate is tossing back and forth. You're talking, but you're also listening. You're listening to understand. You're speaking to be understood. If you have two people who are discussing and they get to a point where they agree to disagree. Now, one of the terminologies that I've used, and I said this earlier, a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. Falls in the same light of what you're saying. Is there's times when you get involved in talking to a person and they're just not listening, or you just don't want to listen anymore. I still don't agree with you, and I don't want to hear it no more. I'm standing where I'm at, and that's where I'm convinced against my will. If you're trying to convince me against my will, I'm not going to change my opinion. I'm not going to change my beliefs. That's how you win the debate. Kind of like in court. Okay, here's the judgment. Yes, you're right. I don't like it, but you're right, or you're absolutely wrong, and that person agrees. That's when you can come to a standstill, and you now have a ground of, we have an agreement here.
Well, while you were talking about the debate versus the argument, I was picturing a debate
Mhm.
on television, the politicians, politics,
Right.
or just school debate teams.
Right. They're not arguments,
Each one has their
points.
their serious points that they want to make on a particular topic,
Right.
and they're debating them to win over the populace
Right.
or win over the other team.
Right.
So the other team can say, okay, your argument's better than our argument. It doesn't mean you're right or wrong, it just means your argument is better than my argument,
Right.
or your debate is better than my debate. And it's a discussion. It's not a shouting match.
Right.
It's not a browbeating or beating
And
somebody down.
And you can't turn off your listeners to listening to understand.
Right.
Neither can the other person, because then it's still an argument. It's not, you're not gonna ever get to a solution. So it becomes a sore spot in a relationship, or it's just an irritant that you never get anywhere, and that problem is always gonna be there. If it's something that's a problem that you're talking about, or trying to find a resolution to something, if you don't resolve it, it's always gonna be there.
And also in a debate, I was just thinking that nobody is defensive in a debate.
Right.
They're positive.
Stating facts.
They're stating facts, they're stating their resources, they're stating their information they've got, but they're not being attacked. And they're listening. Whereas in an argument, we've got headbutting contests going on
Right.
here. We got people wanting to prove they're right.
Right.
And one way so many people want to prove they're correct is they raise their voice.
Mhm.
That means I'm assertive and I understand, and if that doesn't work, then I'll start shouting.
Right.
What you have then is a shouting match.
Yeah. A louder argument.
And nobody listens when you're defensive all the time. Because when you're defensive all the time, you're thinking of rebuttals. You're thinking of comebacks. You're thinking of, and some of them get pretty nasty, of replies, and you become personal. Your actually argument's gone after that. Now it's just a name-calling, mudslinging match that no one is going to come out ahead.
Right. So how do we help the audience or us in dealing with people? What are some ways that we can stop that? One way that I can think of is this, is when you get in an argument, a person is talking and talking and talking, trying to convince the other person. And if you talk too long and you say too many things, touch on too many points, you've already lost focus. You're not gonna, now you've got 5 things. Well, they heard the first one and they're still thinking about their answer for that one.
Yep.
And you've got 3 more things out there. And so training ourselves, if we want to resolve something or get to a conclusion, is to stay focused on one point at a time.
Yep.
Come to an agreement with the other party, or agree to disagree and say, okay, I agree with you on this point, but I still don't agree here. And try to run our conversations that way as we would if we were in a debate or in a courtroom. Here's the facts, Your Honor. Well, here's the facts. What are your facts? I don't want to hear all your other stuff. That might be a way of helping, for people to help themselves in stopping arguments or debates.
Well, that reminds me of a time I was helping some couples, and if there's a book that Dr. John Gray wrote, and it's Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus.
Yeah.
If you've read it, it's a great book for couples that
Right.
are struggling and maybe whatever issues. But he said one way to stop arguments is to one or the other person write down what's wrong at night. Write a letter to your partner. Explain what they said, what they did, the actions they took, whatever offended you, what was done, whatever it might be, and address it to them. And this is why I feel the way I feel. You've hurt my feelings, or you embarrassed me, or you did this, or you did that. The other person is to read the letter and not respond until the next day. And think about what the letter contained.
Right.
And then you come back with rational, thought-provoking ideas on how to resolve my feelings or my emotions or my hurt or my anger. And now you're here to help me. because I put it in a letter to you that says I'm hurt because of this, or my feelings are hurt, or I'm angry because of that. And now you're trying to help me, not make yourself right.
Right.
That's one way. That takes a little discipline to stop the shouting and say, okay, I'm mad at you today, I'm going to write you a letter. I mean, you might be letters every night for a while, you never know, but as long as it works and people still respect each other. Because one thing that happened, I found in my practice, is that once the shouting matches start, respect goes out the window.
Yeah.
And respect is a huge foundation for relationships and communication.
Well, and that's where the anger and the other emotions
Yeah.
that are the negative emotions are coming in. When it gets out of control, if we're not in control of our conversations and our communication skills, if we're not in control of them, they're controlling us. And if negatives are coming in, we're reaping what we sow. If we're planting a seed of anger or loud, that's what we're going to get back. It's what's going to grow from it.
And part of your question that you asked me earlier about what do we do, another thing you can work on is getting the person who is trying to convince you of something to get them to start asking questions of you. And
Get them to write it down. They usually don't want to. The ones that are the bullheaded one won't do it.
well, even if they don't agree, and you can say, I don't agree with you, I hear you, you've explained it, I still don't agree with you, and they're going to say, once they say, why not? Now you've started a two-way conversation.
Right.
Because once they've asked a question, or if you can get them to ask that question, well, do you want to know why I don't agree with you? Now they've got to listen.
Now, Mike, I've had that question asked, why do you do that, or why is that? And I start explaining it, and they're going off in another conversation back on it, and I'm, stop. Stop right there. You asked me a question, you didn't even listen to my answer.
Well, that's when I usually stop talking. I would just stop talking and wait for them to finish.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I did.
And I'll say, okay,
It's like,
are you finished now?
You done now. Okay.
Are you finished now? Because I've still got to answer my question. You asked me a question, you haven't allowed me to answer it. It's hard. I'm not going to sit here for 1 second and say it's easy, because it's very difficult. You have one person who's frustrated because you're not agreeing with them, whatever that might be. You're becoming frustrated because they won't let you speak.
And though, Mike, those are usually the ones that can't remember what they asked you, what the question
Yep.
was that they asked you, because they're so busy with their mind going, trying to convince you against your will,
Yeah.
or get you to agree with me, whether you like it or not,
And we're going to sit here and we're having a little
Yeah.
fun with it, but it's a
Yeah.
very serious
Very
issue.
serious, very
serious
serious.
issue. And I want to continue reading just for a
Okay.
little bit here. It
Okay.
says, it's amazing how many of the people we know think we don't understand what they're talking about. For some reason, they don't give us the credit God gave us.
right.
Some do not accept the fact that we do have a brain and really do understand what they're talking. We just chose not to agree with them. How often do we hear, well, let me tell you again? Or, will you listen to me this time? Or, let me rephrase it. You may understand it better. And they've totally disrespected you as a person, or your ability, your education level to understand. They're completely convinced
Yeah.
that theirs is the only answer.
Right.
And that leaves a lot of people hurt. And how do you deal with that as a young couple? And I hate to say it, it's most of the times it's the guys that want to convince the women. But there's some strong-willed women out there too, and I know you're one of them. So I know I have to listen. I have to listen when you talk. I know that. So I've learned that the hard way.
It was my husband.
Yes. Sometimes it may even get to the point where we have to tell them we don't want to hear anymore. Rather than them understanding we do not agree, then they get mad. They get defensive, and they start to accuse us now of not listening to them. And all you've done is listen to them.
Mhm.
All you've done is hear every different direction they can rephrase the question to get you to understand and get you to accept their point of view. And once you get stuck on that, unless you can get it resolved within a day or maybe two at the most, it now becomes stuffed in anger, stuffed in frustration. And how do you resolve that? And I deal with, my wife doesn't understand me stuff all the time from guys. My wife doesn't understand where I'm going. My wife doesn't understand my long-term vision or my long-term plan.
Right.
And I ask them, does your long-term vision or long-term plan include anything she's saying? Does your long-term vision include anything she wants to do? Or is your relationship and your marriage and your future all based on your plan and your idea and not involving her input? And that, I can say that, but they're sitting there paying me to talk to them.
Right.
So they're going to listen because they want to get their money's worth out of me, if nothing else.
Right.
And they actually start to listen. And they actually start to say, no, it doesn't. It's my vision for our family. I say, that's great. You're including your family and your vision for the future. I think that's wonderful. But you have a family that you're excluding from your vision. You want them to come along for the ride, but you don't want to make them part of it. And unless you can make them feel valuable in your marriage and in your relationship, if they don't feel valuable, they're going to struggle to go along with you. And you don't realize that you're devaluing them by saying, okay, and I understand the pride of manhood, wanting to take care of my family and be the breadwinner, and it's all an ego trip and it's all a big pride. That's what men do. And I don't think that's ever going to change. I don't think it's never changed from the old days. And I don't think it's ever going to change. We men think that we can give direction and be the breadwinners and the hunter-gatherers and take care of our family. And that's great. And we need to have that. But you also have a partner and a wife or your significant other, whatever that happens to be. And that's fine. If that works for you, that's what it works. That's great. But the input from that other person has to be considered in your decision on where you're going to go.
Yeah, usually they see it all, if they see it all different than you do, or it's hard to get on that same page, and that's where it comes to having that debate versus an argument versus, really establishing a conversation.
Yeah, when I start working with a couple, the first two, I try to get them to sit down and face each other, and they ask each other one question. It's the same question. They both ask each other, and that is, we're going to start our relationship, or we're going to renew our relationship. What do you expect from me? You ask that question one time, and then you sit back and you listen to the answers. Then the other person asks the same question of her partner. Okay, we're starting this relationship, or we're going to renew our relationship. What do you now expect from me? Now we start with a concrete base on expectations. Because expectations are what gives us our frustration if our expectations aren't met.
Right.
So what we try to do is we try to have a family expectations. This is where we want to go as a couple. Part of my expectations are being met. Part of your expectations are being met. We've compromised on some of the other ones. And now we have a couple's expectations of our life in the future. Once you can get that established and get that understood between both of them, it's pretty easy actually to go forward from there. But they both have to listen, and that's why I ask them to have one question to start with before we even start the counseling. It's they need to understand what the expectations of each other are.
Mm-hmm.
And once that happens, then we don't have this forced to agree stuff any longer. Because they've already given out their expectations. And sometimes they're pretty unique, but most of them work out pretty good. Not all of them, but most of them do. I'm going to read just a little bit more here. We all have things we feel passionately about and want others to join in that passion and support us, but not everyone will. That doesn't mean they're not listening. A question you may ask yourself is, do I want others to agree with me because I browbeat them and it doesn't matter whether they agree or not? I just want to know they're listening to me. Or are they afraid not to give me their honest opinion? Even if they disagree with me and with everything I'm saying. That's hard. That's hard for the person who wants to be the controller and say, you're not listening to me because you're not agreeing with me, to then ask themselves, do I really want their opinion? Do I really want to hear what they want to say? Go ahead.
I can see that as me. Sometimes, I'm just such the leader. My poor husband is like, do I really want him to agree with me or do I want him to follow me? So I have to keep myself in check on that one. No, I want him to understand and go right along with me. Come on, let's go.
It's hard,
It is hard.
I'm a
Determining that leader and, getting that even team, as the Bible talks about, the equally yoked.
Yep.
Then you think about that as an oxen, you've got two oxen that are pulling and you've got them roped and one's pulling this way and one's pulling that way or one's pulling ahead faster, That's like a marriage, if you don't get on the same page with situations and get in agreement, then you're doing that.
Well, that's the same thing with
The relationship.
myself and my wife. I have to make myself, because I'm aggressive.
Oh, yeah, I'm an outgoing person.
I'm an assertive person,
Yeah.
and
Busy.
I've done that all through my military career, my military life, and what I was doing, working in another industry that demanded that you have those assertiveness and aggressiveness all the time. And it's hard to get rid of.
Mm-hmm.
But I find myself now, and maybe it's age and wisdom that comes along with it, to start asking, do you want to come with me? Do you want to come here? Do you want to go there? Let's go do this. And it's an inclusive thing. It's an involved thing. And I never did that before. A long time ago, I didn't have to. Now I feel I need to because I value her.
Mm-hmm.
I value her input, and I value her sayings and what she has to do, and the conversation we have once we start driving down the road. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we don't even talk. We just drive, and she reads, and I'm driving. But a lot of times we have a lot to talk about. I've stopped that assertiveness about having to be right all the time. Because I know some of the times I've been right, I wished I wasn't. I really wished I wasn't sometimes, because all it got me was a bunch of grief that I didn't want to have. And I maybe didn't put too much thought into it. But in what we're talking about here is people who don't listen. People who want to be right all the time. They feel that they have to. They feel I've got to be in charge. And a lot of that comes from a lot of, we're not going to go into a big counseling session here, but a lot of that comes from their upbringing. We talk all the time about children and the environment children grow up in, and you can look back on some people and see the environment they grew up in, and how they present themselves, how they talk. Once you get into their family history, which I do a lot of, you can come back and you can point out to them, that's not you talking, that's your dad. Yeah. That's not you talking, that's your mom. Mm-hmm. And then they'll say, yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's what in your mom and your dad's life, that probably suited them, and it was probably okay. For you and your husband, it's not working.
Right.
And you need to figure that out.
Yeah.
I mean, moms and dads get us over the hump into 21, and for that point, we're on our own.
Right.
we've got to figure out how to do it. And with a new partner, it's not the partner who was raised in your family. So they're not going to have the same thoughts.
Right.
And where they come from in life, that's the interesting part to find out about. But once you start to assert yourself over top of somebody, you're then devaluing that person. And a lot of people have trouble with that, especially today. With all the equal rights going on and everything that's going on, everybody has the right say and the same opinion. Life is affected today pretty much by technology. And you and I were talking about technology earlier on. Technology is instantaneous.
Well, it also has to do a lot with, Mike, with both parents work.
Yeah.
In most cases, most parents work. Most parents are trying to do both jobs, the female's job and the male's job. You know, and there's two parts to that. God designed us for the male to be the breadwinner, the one to go to work, be the strong one, standing up saying, wait a minute, why didn't you obey your mother? And trusting that his wife was going to have the same rule, you know, the same walk. Then, you know, as time's gone on, it's become a two working family, you know, two parents working. That causes a lot of that. You know, I have as much say as you do, and there's kind of like this wall of strength, you know, and so I think that has a lot to do with some of the situations. You know, the women are the pullers in a lot of situations. You know, they're the strong ones. They're still doing the laundry and, you know, and working too, picking up the kids.
And it's the guys sometimes that have a hard time letting go of that and asking rather than telling. And when you get an ego, whether it be a woman or a man,
Right.
that interferes with so much stuff, and interferes with the future of a family.
Right.
It can destroy a family because
Yeah. That ego can become a high horse. You know, I do everything around here.
and that comes from both sides.
Yes, it does.
You know, you just go to work and you sit in an office all day. You have no idea what I'm doing at home.
Right.
And
that's where communication, going back to the communication, that's where it's so important for us to get a handle on communication and understanding, not being convinced, not stopping at a wall and saying, okay, well, I'm going to just give in, be convinced against my will, because I'm of the same opinion still.
Right.
And how does your book say it?
what's that?
The headline of
Oh, forced to agree?
forced to agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're forced to agree because you're
Yeah.
not getting anywhere.
Yeah, if you would just listen to me, you'd understand.
Yeah, if you would just listen, you'd get it. Yeah, but you're not listening.
And we're lucky enough that that's hopefully with technology today and families growing, that it's changed since when I was a kid and when you were a kid. And with the two parents working, they have to share. They have to share the load. One comes home early, one comes home late. They still have kids coming. One works a first shift, one works a second shift.
And it takes good communication skills between the two to keep a good household going, keep a family going strong.
And there is so much involved with that part
Yeah.
that when they start to get children, the whole dynamics change,
Oh.
everything changes, and now you get back to what did I tell you in the first place? You know, then somebody starts to say, well, I've told you so.
Right.
Hindsight, you know, we've all got that. And a lot of
You would
times,
have listened, I told you so, yeah.
yeah, we hear that all the time. Well, we've just about finished here tonight, and we thought this was a good topic to cover because we're both interested in this. And my whole thing is keep aware of what you're teaching your children. That's what we are all about here on this show, on the Blue Seahorse Show, is involve your children.